Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for that nice introduction. Now, I'm supposed to go about 25, 30 minutes, would you say? Is that it? Would you please signal me when I get that far, and I will just stop as soon as I get to the time. First, as a quick introduction, in some presentations, I actually give a prize for anyone who knows what the thing is up on the screen. And unfortunately, I didn't bring the prize with me, so I can't offer a prize. But does anyone know what it is offhand? You've got the idea, but it's called a Hoberman sphere, and it actually has a scientific name. But it's a metaphor for interconnectedness because it's now a child's toy or an office toy. But as it expands, everything is linked to everything else. So it's yet another metaphor for something that I think has been very much part of the discussion here. And this is going to be interesting, actually, because I have to look at the screen to be able to see. No, the problem is different. The problem is that it doesn't appear here. There's some hiccup with it. In any event, here's what I'm going to try to do today. And as I said, I'll get as far as I get, and then I'll stop because of the time. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the development field has evolved and essentially where we are. And to some extent, I'll make that into a personal journey. Secondly, I want to focus on ethical issues. Now, we've all focused a lot on ethics in this conference. It's striking to me how little the question of poverty has been central to the agenda. That's what I've worked on for my life and my career. To me, that is the single most important problem that faces humankind today, more than the environment. That's why I work on those issues. But in any event, I think that the challenges present a lot of varied ethical dilemmas, and I'm going to go through some of those. And finally, hope to come out with a few ideas about where we are and where we might go. Some of the takeaways that I hope that you will come away from this discussion with is, first of all, that this is the most important issue that we face, that it is a challenge that faces each one of us individually. It's more dramatic even in times of crisis, as now, in part because people so easily forget the problems of world poverty. Last week in Washington, there was the National Prayer Breakfast, and I'll come back to this, but one of the themes was the numbness that people feel in the face of children dying, maternal mortality in terms of people being hungry. How much easier it is to focus on the immediate crisis or on the immediate issue that's in front of us, and how do we change that equation? I hope to give you a little bit, this is something I do in courses at Georgetown University, but a little bit of a sense of how to navigate some of the fractious debates about development, which in a way contribute to paralysis. And third, to come away with a sense of hope, because there is some danger sometimes of people being mired in the difficulties and therefore feeling that you might as well not do anything because nothing works. I think that's not true, and it's important to have that kind of inspiration. To start with Haiti, on our side of the Atlantic at least, well, first of all, let's say 2010 has not started terribly well. 2010's been a rough start to a decade with the Haitian earthquake. For me, I must say the Massachusetts earthquake was a little disconcerting, the Supreme Court, a few other issues like that. I'd like to push the restart button. But in any event, the Haitian earthquake is something that's shaken many people, and it brings out some of the issues around the development business. The first is the humanitarian drama and what that means in terms of the long-term effort. So the first thing that people are aware of is that as in the tsunami, or as in Timor-Leste, or as in so many different situations, there's an outpouring of support, and then the fear that the spotlight will move on to another crisis and people will forget. So there's a tremendous amount of rhetoric that is saying on Haiti, we simply cannot let that happen. But it shows you the blurred lines between the humanitarian groups, many of which have evolved into development organizations, CARE, Catholic Relief Services. All of these started as emergency. But for people, it's not good enough just to bring people back to where they were before. What you want is to move on to a different plane, onto a different paradigm. And with Haiti, you have the additional drama that Haiti is one of the failed states of the world. It's one of the least successful development enterprises with not only decades, centuries of tragic history behind it. And so the question is, how can we do things in ways that are different? What is it that will take? Second thing that the crisis has brought out is the change in the way aid works. In the United States, more than half of the population has contributed to Haiti. Many of them instantly with cell phones, giving donations, mobilization of people. In many ways, it shows the best of humankind, the willingness to care, the willingness to act. It also shows the changes in the way that finance works in this new social networks, the modern technology age. So I think that there's a sense that things have changed in ways that won't go back. Third, which is an issue in the aid business, which I will come back to briefly, is the extraordinary complexity of the aid business. Haiti has more than 10,000 NGOs. And I think you can safely say that it hasn't worked very well. So the problem of aid coordination, aid harmonization, is brought out in vivid technicolor in the Haiti situation. And I work at the moment primarily on the area of the linkage between religion and development, the dramatic numbers of faith groups that are involved there. And yet you have to ask, is it adding up? So one of the challenges in the aid business, and it's quite interesting, and we could do another poll here, but I'll tell you what the poll results are in most cases, is that you have a substantial group, and it certainly is the official line, that we have to get a grip, that the complexity of public sector, private sector, NGOs, UN specialized agencies, bilateral aid programs, there's a Latvian aid program, there's now a Basque aid program, that from the point of view of a developing country or of a manager, minister of finance, it's totally out of control. And that what you need is to get a grip, that having multiple procurement systems, multiple audit systems, reporting systems is simply ridiculous. So that's one perspective, which is get a grip, aid harmonization, Paris Declaration, Rome Declaration, Accra Declaration, all of them saying we agree we're going to coordinate. We're going to have common procedures and a common framework, and that certainly is the line on Haiti. The other side of it, which echoes a little bit one of the dilemmas we were talking about yesterday, is the sense that decentralization is best, that communities know best, that creativity comes with competition, that the best thing is to let 1,000 flowers bloom, let things fail. And this is very much, of course, the perspective of many NGOs. So I'll just tell you what the polls often show us, that it's about, out of 100, it's usually about 80 that are on the get a grip, and 20 are on the let 1,000 flowers bloom. But certainly this is present in spades in Haiti. There obviously are tremendous questions about what sustainability means. And they come back to the let's not just rebuild Haiti so that it's the way it was, as miserable and insecure and with as few trees, all of those different meanings of sustainability. Let's try this time, let's use the crisis as an opportunity to do better. The issues of governance and corruption are very much on people's minds. It's a characteristic of weak states. It's a vicious circle. The more corruption you have, the worse development, therefore the weaker the institutions. Plus, whenever you have a lot of money, almost inevitably you have the dangers of corruption. So the question of how do you corruption-proof, how do you deal with the issues of governance, again in better ways than in the past, is very much on people's minds. A theme that is a very strong theme in the development world is ownership. It's almost a mantra. And what that essentially means is that if you do not have the genuine, deep commitment of people in a society to bring about change, and if it is not done in keeping with the way they want to do it, then it's not going to work. And that's true of economic reform programs. It's true of banking regulation to a degree. It's very much true of almost any development enterprise. And yet you're seeing some pushback on that in Haiti. You're seeing pushback in two ways. The first, I don't think we've ever seen a government as decapitated as the Haiti government. No buildings, no telephones, no cars. Many people killed, basically the destruction of an infrastructure. So the idea of the Haiti government sort of taking full command of the relief operation is simply unrealistic. But you also have people saying, well, isn't this something that comes under the aegis of a responsibility to protect? Can we really just let this bumble on as in the future? Isn't there a need, isn't there a case for a true, driven international effort? So you're seeing, I think, some fraying around the edges of the mantra of ownership, which I think is quite interesting. And in many ways, it's healthy. It goes to the interconnected arguments. It goes to the dilemma that we all have, that we talk about a nation state, the Westphalian system, and yet we also talk about a globalized world where borders are porous. So how do you deal with that in a situation like the case of Haiti? I was listening to a radio program the other day and heard one of those call-in questions that makes you cringe. Somebody called in and said, why should I care about Haiti? What's it got to do with me? And the person who was answering, who I think was the Haitian ambassador, sort of was, I mean, how can you even ask me that question? But the point is that it is an implicit one. It is one. And you have the Peter Singer argument, which is quite an interesting, the ethical dilemma, that any of you here who were walking by a pond and saw a child drowning would immediately jump into the pond and save the child. But saving a child in Mongolia, or saving a child in Pakistan, or in Malawi, or in Cusco, is a much different proposition. And it's both the ethics of what you see, what's in front of you, what you can do something about. It's the belief in whether it's going to work. But increasingly, we live in a world where you can't put those questions aside. So very brief. Did I do this one? No, this doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to have to. I wanted to give you a little bit of my background at one of these. Briefly again, and you have a more than generous introduction, but essentially I'm a development person completely. I worked for almost 40 years, largely on Africa, on Latin America, and East Asia, very much in an operational position, most of the time in the World Bank. About 10 years ago, I was drafted by the president of the World Bank and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Jim Wolfenson and George Carey, to work on an area that was something I knew virtually nothing about, but that has proved to be fascinating, which is trying to build bridges between religion and development. Of course, one question people say is, what's religion got to do with development? The answer is everything from AIDS to zebras. I challenge you to present any issue, whether it's microfinance or water or airports, and there will be a faith dimension. But one of the issues that's been most interesting is that the dialogue, the effort at dialogue with a wide range of faith institutions has brought out the ethical issues around development in ways that the technocratic language of an institution like the World Bank had obscured. So it isn't that religious organizations are more ethical or that religiously inclined people are more ethical. But they tend to articulate it, and they tend to think about it more. And that's been, I think, a remarkable lesson that we've drawn from this effort at dialogue, of trying to frame the issues and the choices. So I'm very pragmatic. I'm now called a scholar practitioner. But I come out of having worked probably on 80, 90 countries on many crises. I was very much shaped by working on Africa during the 70s and 80s. It was a constant lesson in humility of what can go wrong, but never did it dampen the sense of hope. I was going to tell you 4 stories, and I will simply refer to them because otherwise they would take the whole time. But they are, I wish I had more time because they're fun stories. The first project that I worked on was in Madagascar in the early 1970s, and it was a cattle ranching project. The idea was to introduce Australian and Texan ranching techniques into the middle of Madagascar. It was one of the more spectacular failures of the World Bank because the local villagers thought that they owned the land. The government had given it happily to this enterprise. They stole the cattle, burned the pastures. Butchers from the town came and they simply slaughtered the cattle on the spot and left the ears on the barbed wire. What's interesting about this story was that it resulted in a pendulum shift towards a village livestock project, but what we're now seeing is coming back again of the pendulum, so into agro-industry, and some of the same challenges are coming back onto the agenda. Mauritania is a brief story. I was country director moving, and it was during a time when there was refugees and tensions along the border with Senegal. And we wanted to talk to the government about it as the World Bank, but it was not really our business because it was very political, so we were trying to find ways to do that. But in any event, I was in the car with the Minister of Agriculture, who had been a military person going towards the fleuve, towards the valley. So we started talking, and I asked him about agriculture. He didn't know very much about it, but I finally hit on camels, and he knew every camel in the country by name, probably owned about 3/4 of them. So we had a long discussion. I asked about cattle, got a little bit less, sheep and goats, and much less. And we came to a village, and I said, well, I looked around, and there were 20 or 30 donkeys walking through with children on them, carrying wood, carrying moving house, water, you name it. So I said, what about donkeys? He said, on n'a pas d'âne. We don't have any donkeys. I said, well, what's that? He said, ça n'a pas d'importance. It's not important. I think that the lesson that I drew from this is how easy it is not to see what's in front of you if it doesn't fit your worldview. So his worldview, smallholder agriculture, the culture of poverty, was not his world. So he literally did not see. And even when it was pointed out, didn't see it as significant for the discussion. So I think that happens very often, this question of what we see and how we interpret. Washington, a priest and the World Bank's education specialist, we were having a meeting, and the discussion started with the priest talking about an exchange program with Al-Azhar and how important that was, theological exchange. The guy from the World Bank's eyes glazed over completely. What on earth does this have to do with me? What is Al-Azhar? Never heard of it, etc. So I changed the subject, and I said to him, well, can you tell us how you're dealing with issues of values in education? He said, oh, what we want is value-free education. And the priest almost passed out with horror. But it's, again, an illustration of very different conversations taking place, both with good sense, if you dig into it, but the very different perspectives. And finally, just on Accra, we had a meeting in Accra a year and a half ago with the World Council of Churches. And again, what was fascinating there was that the religious leaders who came to the meeting said poverty is getting worse. The World Bank and IMF people said poverty is getting dramatically better. And neither could hear the arguments that the other was making. It was a very clear case of how difficult dialogue is on these issues. I guess that's it. Okay, the development business. I'm going to go very quickly through this. Basic point, what we talk about with development has changed dramatically to the point that the meaning of the word development is very obscure. Many students hear about the third world, have no idea what the second world was, because it's so long ago that there was any kind of Second World War. But basically, as a very simplistic progression, the notion that countries would develop, that there would be essentially a move towards equality among different countries, really is something that came after World War II. And until before then, there was a notion of progress. There were implicit theories, but development studies, the whole profession, the institutions, the NGOs, all of them are a post-World War II phenomenon to a large extent. Went through a number of different phases. In the beginning, the sense of the importance of infrastructure, ports, railroads, airports, roads, high technology, the ranching project, but a steady increase in the scope of what people meant by development. Education was not part of the agenda. It's now probably the single most important aspect of thinking about development. Health was not part of it, is now the focus on poverty, on the lowest 40% initially, on people living below $1 a day. Tremendous change in the way people have been thinking about development. Some of the current trends, you've moved from experts to consultation, will at least ask your opinion, to participation, that will have a committee where people will actually help to make a decision, to empowerment, which is the mantra today, with the sense that people should have the right to live their own lives, with all the caveats that I put in place around Haiti. Gender was not an issue 25, 30 years ago when people talked about gender. There would be loud giggles and nobody would come to the room except the tiny number of women who were working there. No self-respecting development institution today does not have a policy on gender. And it is an article of faith that changing relations between men and women is one of the single most important areas of change that can bring about progress in society. So what you have is a tremendous change. You also have a change that's taken place between a project approach to a program approach and a sector approach. You have an awareness, which I came to through the route of struggling with projects in Zaire, that no amount of work at the community level can succeed in a failed policy environment. So that's where structural adjustment and conditionality, policy conditionality came from, was this awareness that if you don't have the two working together, the pressure from above and the pressure from below, you'll get nowhere. So the contemporary picture is a development field that's very complex and very dynamic, very complex and changing institutional arrangements and ideas. It's completely multidisciplinary. It's not about economics. It's also about sociology. In the beginning, when I first was there, any political scientists in the World Bank masqueraded as other disciplines. Now there are all disciplines are represented. You have dramatic shifts in the money side, which is a story in itself, but the main piece of that is a huge increase in private flows, which dwarf ODA, official development assistance. You have a much sharper focus on results and on monitoring, with tools coming from the private sector. You have a tremendous emphasis on governance. You have very fractious debates. I don't know how many of you know Sachs, Easterly, Moyo, Dambisa Moyo, Collier, etc. In a sense, they're almost like gladiators taking different views. There's one illustration. I have some resources at the end. There was sort of an amusing exchange of someone saying why nothing will work and someone else arguing why my project is the only project that will solve every problem in the world. So you have a very unproductive development debate. But you also have much room for hope. And again, there's a marvelous set of videos by Hans Rosling. How many of you have watched Hans Rosling, Swedish public health specialist? Well, you all have a treat in front of you. It's two TED Talks that I have the link here. But he's a genius communicator. But the basic message is the seemingly impossible is possible. That we live in a time when, for the first time in human history, we can offer every human being a chance at a decent life. And that's something when you think that it was not very long ago that most Europeans, the majority of Europeans were malnourished, that a very substantial percentage lived in a situation equivalent to slavery. Tiny fraction had education. So we are living a modern miracle, but it's a miracle that's potential, that's not realized. I'm going to skip this. So I'm going to go through very quickly what I see as the arguments of why care. And through that, what I see is some of the major ethical debates. And what you see with people who believe that poverty is an important issue is that they'll mix the arguments all up. And you see that with a Tony Blair, with a Gordon Brown. You see that with everyone who cares about it. But I'm going to pick them apart a little bit. And what I'm going to give you is my ethical order. So the first one, and you also, I'm sure many of you are familiar with these, but there are some remarkable ethical scaffolds. There's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Charter of Compassion was launched by Karen Armstrong in November, basically focusing on the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Earth Charter continues to be a remarkable ethical statement of the links between human and the natural environment. Hans Kung's global ethic is, again, a remarkable effort to draw on the best of the world's traditions to emphasize how much we have in common. Amartya Sen with human capital, the Millennium Development Goals, which represent a historic common commitment to providing a decent life for everyone. Gandhi's social sins from 1926 are a wonderful inspiration. Wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, science without humanity, knowledge without character, politics without principle, commerce without morality, and worship without sacrifice. Very good, I think, ethical scaffold. This is Hans Kung's global ethic. But the 5 core arguments, the first one, and to me the most powerful, and one that you see organizations like CARE, like UNICEF, trying to implement, it's fundamental to the Millennium Development Goals. But it's a difficult concept. But it is that development is not voluntarily helping other people. It is a fundamental question of right. It is a question, why should where you are born determine the opportunities that you have in life? It's very striking that one of the common metaphors that people use, tomorrow's Super Bowl Sunday, so this is, or today is, yes, is the level playing field, which is an interesting analogy, I think, because it implies that there's competition and that somebody wins and someone loses. But at least you have a fair start. Then that, I think, is at least the basis of the notion that development is a matter of right. Hillary Clinton gave an important speech in December at Georgetown University emphasizing the links between human rights and development, which created a lot of controversy, but it still is an important principle. So this, I think, is the theory. When you look at an organization like CARE or like Catholic Relief Services, and you ask them, how is it different when you have a rights-based approach? It's interesting. The main difference is a question of attitude. It's a question that you truly believe that the person you're working with is your partner, that they are equal, that they have a humanity, which is a common humanity. These are a couple of cartoons. I don't know how well you can see it, but Noah's Ark is at the top, and it's weighed down by two very large, fat people, and the question is, who let the Americans on board? The other one is a crude image of how many people see the world, the division between the rich and the poor. And this one is an image of the cultural invasion, which is one of the complexities behind the rights-based. You see Mickey Mouse, McDonald's, dollars, etc. But these are the images that we're working with as we grapple with this question of what does a rights-based approach truly mean in the way we think and the way we behave. So that, to me, is the fundamental core of why we should care about the billions of people, the hundreds of millions of children who go to bed hungry and who don't go to school, people who don't have jobs. The second level is the ancient caring and compassion. And it's interesting, I think we'd like to think that charity is not what this is about anymore, that Haiti is not about charity, it's about justice. But it's also important not to forget the humanity and the compassion and the caring, which is a part, again, of our humanity. But there are the dangers that I think we're all aware of in treating development as a matter of our volition, that it's our choice to give as much as we'd like. I think we need to balance the caring and compassion with the question of rights. This is a picture, you don't see this anymore, actually. This is considered immoral now, to have the pictures of starving children. But to remember that there are 20 or 30,000 children who died today, that at least gets people thinking about what this is about. The third area in thinking about development that's fairly new and very dynamic is the bottom of the pyramid arguments. And at the crudest, it is the reason to help development is because they're markets. You can sell. You can make lots of money. There is also this sense of the social entrepreneur. Many of you, I'm sure, are social entrepreneurs. The energy that can come with unleashing the potential. Using the market, using both. It's interesting, the Millennium Development Goals try to use some of the tools of the private sector, measurement, accountability, deadlines, the idea of trying to use the strengths of the private sector to unlock some of the ancient traps of poverty. I heard Robert McNamara once giving a talk and was impressed because I thought this was pretty opportunistic. But what he said to an audience of Americans was basically, either you help the Mexicans in Mexico or you'll help them in the United States. And it is underlining something that's been discussed here, which is the importance of migration and capital, human capital movements in today's world. The degree to which we no longer live in a world with walls, that national borders are very porous, and that we need to think of the human capital as a major element. And the final argument, which I think was told for me most dramatically in a Nadine Gordimer story, which is called Fairy Tale. It's about a very well-meaning family in southern Africa. I think it's either Zimbabwe or South Africa, that gradually surrounds their house with a wall, with protection, with security services. As the walls get higher and higher with wire fence on it, finally their child is caught in the revolving knives at the top of the wall. But it is the basic argument that if we don't do something about this, we'll die. It's the complex link between poverty and terrorism. We know terrorists are not poor. We know poor people are not terrorists. But there's no question that there's a degree of anger, a sense of injustice and unfairness that is linked to the poorest countries and to the failing states of the world. And so we have, as a final resort, an interest in doing something about it. So areas for action. I think we need to appreciate the complexity of the challenge we face, but not be paralyzed by it. We need to respect different roles. The economists have a role, so do the sociologists, the entrepreneurs, the advocates. You cannot be everything at the same time. Each one of you will play different roles in your lives, as I do, and we need to work together to solve these problems. I feel very strongly that we need to deal with the difficult issues, including ones like abortion, including the tension between growth and solidarity, between equity and entrepreneurial dynamism. And we need to act and find ways to act as individuals and communities. So it's also worth remembering that fighting poverty is morally very simple. The picture of the child, the story of Haiti, there's no question that that's the right thing to do. Fixing it is difficult. When it comes to the next stage of challenges, which is building a world with equity, that's morally difficult and practically even more difficult. So when you have a difficult problem, you need to start now, and we need to work together. And so the areas for dialogue, I won't even go through these. We can come back to them if we have time for questions. And these are some of the references, including the TED video. So I think I'll stop there. I think you didn't stop me fast enough. But in any event, I hope that this is thought-provoking, but also gives you hope and sets you all in motion in trying to solve the problems of poverty and development.
Okay, we do have some time for some questions. Who would like to go first? Maybe let's start in the back, and then we'll come to the front.
Thank you so much for your speech. I have a question regarding the institution of the World Bank. And my question is, yesterday we heard from the ambassador of Lesotho, and he mentioned that the World Bank does not fulfill its promises of aid to Africa and developing countries in general. My question is, who is held responsible for not upholding these promises, and what is being done so that money is being sent to Africa to help development projects? Thank you.
Well, there are many different layers to an answer, and I'm not quite sure what point the ambassador was making. I have, I'll put a pitch in for it. I have a book on the World Bank, which is called the World Bank from Reconstruction to Development to Equity, which is basically a positive story of intentions and a story of a very complex institution that is doing very different things and doing them in differing degrees of success in different parts of the world. I think the World Bank has many flaws. If the World Bank disappeared, I think we would create it in a somewhat different form. But I think the World Bank plays extraordinary roles in the world today. The central challenge for everyone who works on world poverty, the real central challenge is Africa. And Africa is a constant lesson in humility because it's Murphy's Law. And in many ways, almost everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. And hopefully, everyone has learned from it. I'm trying to deduce from your question what it is that is the immediate concern. And one of it may be that the Gleneagles, the G8, et cetera, have made promises of transferring large sums of money to Africa for development, and that's also the promise of the Millennium Development Goals, which essentially have as a core that will raise funds for HIV/AIDS, for education, for health, according to what's needed to reach the goals, not according to what we happen to have available and what happens to be convenient. There's a substantial amount more money going to Africa, but the flows are substantially short of what is needed to bring about development. And there are a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is conflict, that if there's one thing that we've learned, It is that you cannot manage development programs in a failed state or one that's at war. And it's a tragic trap that the countries that need help the most can't use it well. And so the effort needs to focus on peace. But of course, peace doesn't come unless people have hope, so that once again, you're caught in this vicious circle. But that is one of the reasons, is the weakness of states. The concern about poor governance, which means both inefficiency and corruption. My sense is that the envelope has been pushed pretty far in terms of mobilizing development support for countries where it's working pretty well. There's problems with coordination that I referred to in the beginning. There also are problems with overly complex procedures. But in general, I think that the problems are more fundamental than any lack of goodwill.
Thank you very much. There is a saying among economists, and it goes, it may work in practice, but how does it fit into the theory? So I want to ask you whether is it really necessary to make a general theoretical framework linking moral ethics and economics and development, and how do you think that how it may affect the paradigm of development in the next years? Thank you.
These are all good questions. It's wonderful to be with you. I don't believe in excessive theorizing. I think that you need to get on with it. The world is a very complex, messy place. What's appropriate in Mali may not be appropriate in Laos. You need different solutions for different places. You need to learn from experience. In many parts of the development challenge, you need to be adjusting your programs on a monthly basis, if not on a yearly basis. In other words, you have to learn as you go along. That doesn't mean that ethical thinking is not important. And one of the difficulties that I saw, I spent some time in UNHCR on a sabbatical year with the refugee organization, and one thing that really struck me there was that working with the world's refugees, you can't get away from questions of right and wrong. And I realized how much in an institution like the World Bank, in a sincere effort to be fair, things are put in starkly technocratic terms. And so, for example, if you're worried about a dam construction project, you may put it in purely technical terms, and it's easy then to set aside or not to see some of the issues of the human beings and the upset to their lives, because it may not be measured. So I think that there's a real benefit in opening up the discussion of ethical choices, even when your basic framework is an effort to be objective and fair and efficient and to do the right thing. The arguments for aid that I've come up with, my 5 tiers of arguments, are because the battle to persuade publics in the richer countries that development assistance is important is not over. That's the Haiti lesson, that people are afraid that within a few weeks, the fact that over 200,000 people died in an earthquake and that they're still suffering and have no houses will be forgotten, because there'll be another crisis. There'll be a snowstorm. There'll be, and that people can so easily forget the trauma of HIV/AIDS, or the infant mortality from malaria, or the fact that millions of people don't have jobs. So we need to be making the case all the time. And So this reflects, the presentation I gave today reflects the fact that I'm in many, many different audiences with people who have very different interests and very different questions. And in a sense, this is my effort both to link them. It's not one or the other that's a reason. They're all important. But to try to think about some of the linkages among the issues and the contradictions. The contradictions, for example, between the pure charity, when you're trying to persuade people that a child with a hair lip deserves some support, or some of the other moving pictures that you see, some of the child sponsorship programs, which appeal to the best part of people who really do want to help a child when they see a child in need. And then one hopes that you'll take those people towards a place where this concept of rights, that it's not just because I feel good that I'm going to help a child to go to school, but because it's better for the world, and it's also the right thing to do.
Hi. My question is, you touched upon the increasing role of faith-based groups earlier on, and I would like to know what your opinion is on the subject more, I guess, elucidate a little more clearly, because oftentimes I feel like the motivation behind these faith-based group is, it's part development, but it's also part proselytizing. And I want to know how the World Bank grapples with this and what this power dynamic shift has been in recent years.
We started in the World Bank with two primary drivers of why care, essentially, about the world of faith. The first one was that in the anti-globalization and in critiques of debt, critiques of structural adjustment, faith voices were very strong. And essentially the idea was, here are two communities whose primary ethical motivation is caring about poverty that are fighting each other. This doesn't make sense. So the idea was, can't we reason together? Can't we find some way to bridge these gulfs? The second one is actually a very interesting piece of history that goes way beyond the development world to the whole international relations world, is that through a variety of historical developments, religion was completely left out of international affairs and international relations. You can look at 1,500 articles about international relations, and 4 deal with religion. You look at the 2,000-page history of the World Bank. In its first 50 years, there's one mention of religion, which is the Catholic Bishops' Conference in 1962. So you have a complete blind spot, which comes back to my Mauritanian Minister of Agriculture who didn't see the donkeys. I mean, you go to Kenya and you see churches everywhere. You go to Morocco, there are mosques, they're important, people care. There are 1,000 reasons why it's important. It was completely off the radar screen. Partly it's laïcité, it's the secular bias. And there's a big pendulum shift going on now. So you have Madeleine Albright's book, The Mighty and the Almighty, which says essentially, if I had thought about religion, I would have done a much better job. Bill Clinton said the same thing. Tony Blair. Just a whole set of, and so it's filling in a missing piece. Now, you get into some complicated arguments because when you talk to people, first of all, the idea that there's a world of faith, that there are people of faith and people not of faith, is ludicrous. I mean, the world is not divided into believers and non-believers. It's a much more complicated picture. Everybody has faith in something. All sorts of people have. So I really think that sort of the only reason to talk about the world of religion is because it's been systematically ignored, and we need to have much better information about it. But it's terribly complicated. I mean, between the Quakers, evangelicals, engaged Buddhists, Hindus, Brahma Kumaris, you name it, there's just an extraordinary world of people out there who are interested in the human condition and in human development, and we need to learn from it and to know much more. What's complicated is that you do have the arguments coming from some people that, first of all, there's a huge part of the world's social services provided by religious organizations. 40, 50%. Ban Ki-moon said that in November at Windsor Castle. 50% of education. We have no idea if that's true, but it's almost certainly an exaggeration. But it's big. And whether it's 40% or 15%, maybe is not that important, but it's big. The second is that people make the case that it's better, that in a faith hospital you'll get better care. Not necessarily true, but we have no idea because it hasn't been evaluated. And then the third is that religious organizations reach the poor more effectively. And again, it's something we don't know enough about, but we know some do. Fe Alegria across Latin America. Absolutely a remarkable organization. 1.4 million kids in school. So we're dealing with ignorance, and because of the ignorance, we're not dealing with the real issues. Now, clearly, there are some groups that cannot separate proselytizing from services, but that's a tiny minority. It's really a tiny minority. And when you deal with a Catholic Relief Services or a World Vision, which are huge organizations, tens of thousands of employees working all over the world, they're very, very clear in stating that the two are separate, that evangelizing and the human support, the development function, are completely different. So I think that there are a lot of, for the reasons that I cited, which is the complete ignorance, there are huge misconceptions, and we do not have a good dialogue.
Professor Marshall, this was excellent. Thank you very, very much for the presentation and for the questions. Thank you.